I'm Abigail, 28, sitting at my parents' Thanksgiving table when it happened. The familiar weight of comparison to my sister Amber hung in the air like the scent of Mom's apple pie. I'd spent decades being measured against her perfection, always coming up short in their eyes. When Dad looked at me across the turkey and said those words, "Why can't you be more giving like your sister? You've always been so selfish," something inside me finally snapped. What came out of my mouth next made every fork freeze midair, every face turn toward me in shock. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever felt unfairly compared to a sibling. Trust me, this story might just give you the courage you need. Growing up in our middle-class suburb outside Boston, the differences between Amber and me were apparent from the beginning. Our modest two-story colonial on Maple Street seemed to have two different sets of rules, depending on which daughter you were. While I gravitated toward art supplies and creative expression, Amber excelled at mathematics and science. She was 2 years older, but the gap in our parents' affection seemed immeasurably wider. My earliest memory of this disparity came when I was 6. I'd spent hours creating a watercolor painting of our family for the refrigerator. Mom glanced at it, said, "That's nice, honey," and tucked it into a drawer. Later that same day, Amber brought home a math test with a perfect score. Dad swooped her up in his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while Mom clapped and suggested we all go out for ice cream to celebrate. I remember staring at my feet, wondering what made her paper so much more special than mine. Our childhood bedrooms told the same story. Amber's walls were adorned with academic achievement certificates, science fair ribbons, and honor roll announcements. My parents invested in the best desk, the newest computer, and a dedicated study area for her. My room, though comfortable, lacked the same level of thoughtful investment. When I asked for art classes at age 10, Dad hesitated, calculating the cost and questioning if it was worth it since it's just a hobby. When Amber needed advanced tutoring for her SAT preparation at 16, they didn't blink at the expense. Birthdays highlighted the disparity too. For Amber's 13th birthday, my parents organized an elaborate party with 30 classmates, hired a professional photographer, and gifted her a new laptop for her studies. For my 13th birthday the following year, I received a modest gathering with 5 friends, store-bought cake, and a set of colored pencils I'd been asking for, though not the professional grade ones I'd hoped for. "Your sister knows what's important in life," Mom would say whenever I expressed disappointment. "Amber understands that academics lead to success." The unspoken implication being that my artistic pursuits wouldn't. Our extended family reinforced this dynamic. At family reunions, Aunt Catherine would immediately ask Amber about her academic achievements while offering me a cursory, still drawing pictures, before moving on. Uncle Frank would slip Amber $20 for being such a smart cookie, while I received a pat on the head. By high school, I'd developed a protective shell of independence. If I couldn't earn their approval, I'd stop seeking it. While Amber joined the debate team and science club, activities that earned enthusiastic parental support, I found refuge in the art studio, staying late after school where the art teacher, Ms. Jenkins, was the first adult who seemed to truly see my potential. "You have a unique perspective, Abigail," she told me one afternoon while reviewing my portfolio. "Your use of color and composition shows remarkable intuition." Her words were the validation I'd been starving for. When senior year arrived and college applications began, the contrast in my parents' involvement was stark. They spent countless evenings reviewing Amber's applications to Ivy League schools, hiring a consultant to perfect her essays, and driving her to alumni interviews. For my applications to art schools, their input was limited to concerns about tuition costs and skepticism about career prospects. Art school. Dad had scoffed when I announced my acceptance to the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design. What kind of stable future will that provide? Meanwhile, Amber's acceptance to Harvard Medical School was celebrated with a catered party. Relatives flew in from across the country. A professional photographer documented the occasion. My parents beamed with pride, repeatedly declaring, "We always knew she was destined for greatness." The pattern continued through our college years. My parents called Amber twice weekly for detailed updates on her studies. Their calls to me were monthly at best, perfunctory check-ins that rarely delved into my accomplishments or challenges. When I won a competitive design fellowship in my junior year, my mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Amber's research paper was published?" This constant redirection toward Amber's achievements gradually eroded my desire to share any part of my life with them. I stopped mentioning awards, exciting projects, or personal victories because the response was always the same: polite disinterest followed by an update on Amber's latest success. By graduation, I developed a complex relationship with achievement itself. Part of me craved recognition so desperately that I pushed myself to excel, while another part had grown cynical about success, knowing that no accomplishment of mine would ever measure up to being more like Amber. This inner conflict followed me into adulthood, a persistent voice questioning my worth regardless of my actual success. The most painful aspect wasn't that my parents loved Amber more. I believe they loved us both. The tragedy was that they couldn't see the damage their comparisons caused, how their inability to value different types of intelligence and success had created a chasm not just between them and me, but between who I was and who I believed I should be to earn their love. 10 years later, I'd built a life in New York City as a graphic designer for a major advertising agency. My apartment in Brooklyn wasn't large, but the exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows made it the perfect space for both living and creating. I'd established myself in the industry with a distinctive style that blended traditional illustration techniques with cutting-edge digital elements. My work had been featured in prestigious design publications, and I'd recently been promoted to creative director for several major accounts. Meanwhile, Amber had fulfilled every expectation our parents had set for her. After graduating from Harvard Medical School with honors, she completed her residency in pediatric medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital. She married Thomas, a successful orthopedic surgeon she met during residency. They purchased a 5-bedroom colonial in Newton, just 15 minutes from our parents. Within 3 years, they produced 2 picture-perfect children, Emma, now 4, and James, 2. Amber worked part-time at a prestigious private practice, balancing her career with family life in a way that earned constant praise from our parents. "Your sister has it all figured out," Mom would comment during our monthly phone calls. Such a beautiful balance of career and family. The unspoken comparison hung in the air. I, at 28, remained unmarried and childless, apparently missing critical milestones on the prescribed timeline of success. Family gatherings had evolved into celebrations of Amber's accomplishments. Last Christmas, dinner conversation revolved entirely around Thomas's new position as department head, Emma's early reading abilities, and Amber's volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. When Dad raised a toast, it was to Amber and Thomas, who make us proud every day with their dedication to helping others and raising our beautiful grandchildren. I sat beside my boyfriend Jason, a talented composer for independent films, as we exchanged glances. We'd been together 3 years, but my family treated him as a temporary fixture, never bothering to engage with him about his work or our relationship. When I attempted to share news about landing the Pearson account, a major achievement that had required months of competitive pitching, Mom nodded distractedly before turning to Amber to ask about Emma's dance recital. "Don't take it personally," Jason whispered, squeezing my hand under the table. "They don't understand what you do." But their dismissal went beyond mere lack of understanding. When I showed them my design for a national campaign that was currently displayed on billboards in Times Square, Dad glanced at it and remarked, "Wouldn't you make more money as an art director at a hospital? I bet Amber could help you get your foot in the door." The pattern persisted through every interaction. Phone calls began with cursory questions about my life, before quickly pivoting to extended updates about Amber's family. Birthday cards from my parents contained brief generic messages, while their social media accounts featured lengthy tributes to Amber on her birthday, complete with childhood photos and expressions of overwhelming pride. My relationship with Jason provided sanctuary from these dynamics. In our relationship, I found the validation and support that had been missing from my family. He attended my gallery showings, celebrated my career victories, and understood the creative process in ways my family never would. Yet, even this positive relationship became a target for comparison. Is Jason ever going to propose? Mom asked during a rare visit to New York. Amber was already married with Emma on the way at your age. We're happy with our relationship as it is, I replied, though the question stung. Jason and I had discussed marriage, but preferred to move at our own pace. Well, I hope you're not waiting too long. Your biological clock won't wait forever, she continued, ignoring my obvious discomfort. Amber's doctor said she could have had complications if she'd waited much longer than she did. These interactions left me emotionally drained. After each family gathering or phone call, I needed days to recover from the subtle digs and dismissals. Jason watched this cycle with growing concern. You know you don't have to keep subjecting yourself to this, right? He suggested after a particularly difficult Thanksgiving the previous year. Maybe some distance would be healthy. I'd considered it, limiting contact, establishing stronger boundaries, but something always pulled me back. A lingering hope that one day they might see me, really see me. A childhood need for parental approval that never fully disappeared despite years of independence. The frustration of wanting to scream, look at what I've accomplished, while simultaneously wanting to ask, why was it never enough? This internal conflict intensified in the months leading up to this year's Thanksgiving. I'd received a prestigious industry award for my campaign with a global environmental organization. The recognition came with a feature in Design Quarterly and a significant bonus. When I called to share the news with my parents, Dad answered with his usual distracted tone. That's nice, honey. Did Amber call you? Emma lost her first tooth yesterday. They're coming over to show us. We're putting together a special dinner to celebrate. A lost tooth warranted a celebration dinner. A national award in my industry barely registered as interesting. That moment crystallized something for me. The pain wasn't just about recognition anymore. It was about being seen as a whole person with valid choices and accomplishments. It was about the cumulative effect of a lifetime of comparisons that had shaped my self-perception in ways I was only beginning to understand. As Thanksgiving approached, these realizations simmered beneath the surface. I decided to attend the family gathering with Jason, determined to approach the dynamics with new awareness. Perhaps understanding the pattern was the first step toward breaking it. What I didn't anticipate was that years of accumulated hurt would find their voice in a single, explosive moment that would permanently alter our family's careful facade. The drive from New York to my parents' home in Massachusetts took nearly 4 hours with holiday traffic. Jason and I filled the time with podcast episodes and conversations about anything except what awaited us. The familiar tension began building in my shoulders as we turned onto Oakwood Drive, where my parents had lived for the past 30 years. Ready? Jason asked, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze as we pulled into the driveway behind Amber's gleaming white SUV. I nodded, taking a deep breath. As I'll ever be. The house looked exactly as it always had: pristine landscaping, fresh paint on the shutters, a tasteful autumn wreath on the front door. Walking up the steps felt like traveling backward in time, returning to a place where I was perpetually insufficient. Mom answered the door with a quick hug. You're here. Everyone's already in the living room. Amber brought the most adorable dessert, little turkey cupcakes that Emma helped decorate. No comment about our drive, no questions about work or life in New York. Just immediate redirection to Amber's contribution. I exchanged glances with Jason, who gave me an encouraging smile. The living room had been redecorated since my last visit. New furniture, new paint color, but the same familiar photo wall that chronicled our family history, or rather, a carefully curated version of it. Amber's wedding portrait dominated the center, surrounded by professional photos of her children at various stages. Photos of her medical school graduation, hospital white coat ceremony, and family vacations filled the remaining space. My presence in the family narrative was relegated to a single group photo from Amber's wedding, where I'd been a bridesmaid, and one childhood school picture. My art school graduation, design awards, and adult life were conspicuously absent from this visual family history. Abigail. Amber called from the sofa, where she sat perfectly poised in a burgundy sweater dress, her husband Thomas beside her. Emma played with blocks on the floor while James napped in a portable crib nearby. We were just telling Mom and Dad about our renovation plans for the kitchen. Dad emerged from the kitchen carrying drinks. Thomas found a contractor who did work for one of his hospital colleagues. Top-notch guy, apparently. Granite countertops and custom cabinets, Mom added, settling into her favorite armchair. It's going to be gorgeous. I accepted a glass of wine from Dad with a tight smile. Sounds nice. How's the apartment? Amber asked, her tone suggesting she was making an effort at reciprocal interest. Still the same, I replied. Though we did finally get that leak in the bathroom ceiling fixed. Rentals are such a hassle, she commented with a sympathetic head tilt that somehow felt condescending. Don't you ever think about buying a place? Building equity instead of throwing money away. Before I could respond, Thomas launched into an explanation of interest rates and the benefits of property ownership, as though I, at 28, had never considered the concept. Actually, Jason interjected politely, we've been looking at some loft spaces in Brooklyn. There's a building being converted that would give Abigail studio space and… Speaking of space, Mom interrupted, Emma starts kindergarten next fall, and they got her into that private school with the beautiful campus. Just like that, the conversation swerved back to Amber's family. I sipped my wine and felt the familiar sense of invisibility settling over me. Dinner preparation provided temporary relief as we moved to the kitchen. I offered to help, but Mom directed me to set the table while Amber assisted with the final touches on the meal. Their easy rapport was evident as they worked together, sharing inside jokes about previous family gatherings. Remember last Easter when James got into the food coloring? Amber laughed. How could I forget? Your mother kept those stained towels just to remind us. Dad responded with an affectionate glance toward my sister. The dining room table had been extended to accommodate everyone. Name cards marked our places, Amber and Thomas at one end near Mom, their children between them. Jason and I were placed opposite, beside Uncle Robert and Aunt Catherine, who had arrived just before dinner. There's my favorite niece, Uncle Robert exclaimed when Amber entered with a serving dish, completely overlooking my presence beside him. The table looked like a magazine spread, Mom's best china, crystal glasses, silver candlesticks, and an elaborate centerpiece of autumn flowers. The turkey, golden and perfectly roasted, sat before Dad's place at the head of the table, ready for carving. As we settled into our seats, the physical arrangement seemed to mirror the family hierarchy. Dad at the head, Mom at the foot, Amber's family prominently placed in the middle, while Jason and I sat in the peripheral spaces along with the extended family. Before we begin, Dad announced, raising his glass, I want to say how thankful I am to have family gathered around this table. Especially grateful to have Emma and James here. Watching you two grow is the greatest joy of being a grandparent. Murmurs of agreement circled the table as everyone raised their glasses. The slight to Jason and me being grouped with family rather than specifically acknowledged wasn't lost on me, but it was so typical that I barely registered the hurt anymore. The meal began with Amber describing her recent promotion at the pediatric practice where she worked part-time. They want me to head up the new adolescent health initiative, she explained while cutting Emma's turkey into bite-sized pieces. It means more hours, but Thomas has been amazing about adjusting his surgery schedule to help with the kids. That's wonderful, honey, Mom beamed. You've always been so good with teenagers. Remember how you volunteered at that youth center in college? The children at the hospital just love her, Thomas added proudly. The administrative staff says patient satisfaction scores go up on days when Amber is working. Dad nodded approvingly. You've always had that special touch with people. Natural caregiver, just like your mother. I felt Jason's foot gently press against mine under the table, his subtle way of checking in. I gave him a small smile to indicate I was okay, though the familiar knot in my stomach was growing tighter. When there was a brief lull in conversation, I decided to share my own news. I recently finished a major campaign for the Wildlife Conservation Fund, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. It was featured in Times Square last week and is being rolled out nationally this month. Oh, that's nice, Mom replied with a quick glance. Is that the thing with the animals you mentioned? Yes, it's a multimedia campaign focused on endangered species protection. My team developed the concept and… Did you hear that James is already recognizing all his letters? Amber interrupted, seemingly unaware she'd cut me off. The pediatric developmental specialist says he's advanced for his age. And, just like that, the conversation pivoted away again. I felt myself disappearing into the background as everyone engaged enthusiastically with Amber's update on her son's precocious development. Throughout the meal, this pattern repeated itself. Any attempt I made to contribute meaningfully to the conversation was acknowledged with cursory interest before being redirected to Amber's family or achievements. When I mentioned an upcoming gallery showing featuring some of my personal work, Aunt Catherine responded with, "That's nice, dear," before turning to Amber to ask detailed questions about Emma's dance recital. The physical sensations of anxiety grew stronger, tightness in my chest, a slight trembling in my hands, the metallic taste of adrenaline. I'd experienced these feelings at family gatherings before, but tonight they seemed more intense, as though years of accumulated hurt were physically manifesting beneath my skin. Jason, noticing my discomfort, tried to create space for me in the conversation. Abigail's wildlife campaign is actually being considered for several industry awards, he mentioned during a momentary silence. The concept she developed has already increased donations to conservation efforts by over 30%. Speaking of donations, Dad said, "Amber, didn't you tell me about that new charity initiative at the hospital?" As dessert was served, Amber's turkey cupcakes receiving effusive praise from everyone, I felt something shifting inside me. The familiar hurt was transforming into something else, something with edges sharp enough to cut through decades of practiced silence. Mom had just served coffee to accompany the apple pie when Amber cleared her throat in that purposeful way she had before making an announcement. "I have some news I wanted to share with everyone," she said, setting down her fork. "The hospital board approached me last week about heading up a new free clinic initiative in the underserved area downtown." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom exclaimed, reaching over to squeeze Amber's hand. "It's a big commitment," Amber continued. "One Saturday a month plus administrative oversight. But I feel like it's important work, especially with the community health disparities we're seeing." "Always thinking of others," Dad said, nodding proudly. "That's my girl." "With your schedule already so full with the kids and your regular practice," Aunt Catherine marveled, "taking on volunteer work shows such dedication." "Well, the children need me at the practice," Amber replied with practiced humility. "And if my privilege as a doctor can help provide care to those who can't afford it, I feel it's my responsibility." "That's what I've always admired about you," Dad said, his voice warm with approval. "Your generosity of spirit. Your willingness to give back." Then he turned to me, his expression shifting subtly. "Why can't you be more giving like your sister? You've always been so selfish." The table didn't go completely silent. Amber was already responding with a half-hearted, "Dad, that's not fair," but in my head, everything stopped. 28 years of comparisons, dismissals, and insufficient love crystallized in that single moment. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" My voice sounded distant, as though someone else was speaking through me. Dad looked slightly taken aback by my response. "I just meant that your sister makes time to help others despite her busy schedule. You could learn something from her example." "Learn something," I repeated slowly, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "About being giving. About not being selfish." "Well, yes," he continued, oblivious to the shift in my demeanor. "Amber has always understood the importance of thinking beyond herself. Even with 2 children and a demanding career, she finds time to volunteer." I set my napkin down carefully beside my plate. "Do you actually know anything about my life, Dad? About how I spend my time or what I contribute to the world?" The table had gone quiet now. Jason placed his hand supportively on my knee under the table. "Of course I do," Dad replied defensively. "You're a graphic designer in New York. You make advertisements." "Actually, I'm a creative director now. I've been one for over a year, but you wouldn't know that because you've never asked about my career progression." My voice remained steady, though I could feel my heart pounding. "Abigail, this isn't the time," Mom began, but I held up my hand. "When would be the time, Mom?" When has there ever been time in this family to talk about my life without it being immediately overshadowed by Amber's achievements? I turned back to Dad. You called me selfish. I'd like you to explain what makes me selfish. Dad shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Mom for support. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that Amber makes certain choices that you approve of. I finished for him. Choices that align with your definition of success. But that doesn't make me selfish. Now, Abigail, Aunt Catherine interjected, your father was just expressing pride in your sister's volunteer work. There's no need to be so sensitive. Something inside me snapped completely then. Years of suppressed feelings surfaced with unstoppable force. Sensitive? Is that what I'm being? I looked around the table at their uncomfortable expressions. Let me tell you what sensitive looks like. Sensitive is sitting through every family gathering hearing endless praise for one person while your existence is barely acknowledged. Sensitive is having your accomplishments dismissed or ignored while someone else's child's lost tooth warrants a celebration dinner. That's not fair, Mom protested weakly. Not fair? Let's talk about what's not fair. I could feel years of hurt fueling my words now. Not fair is growing up believing you're somehow fundamentally less valuable than your sibling. Not fair is working twice as hard for a fraction of the recognition. I turned to face my father directly. You want to know if I'm giving? 20% of my income goes to arts education programs in underserved schools. I mentor 3 young female designers from disadvantaged backgrounds. The campaign I just finished for wildlife conservation? I did it at a reduced rate because I believe in their mission, and my designs have helped them exceed their fundraising goals by over 30%. Dad's expression shifted from defensive to confused. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, I continued, unable to stop now that the dam had broken. You've never asked. You've never shown any interest in my work beyond wondering why I couldn't have chosen something more practical, more like what Amber would choose. I gestured toward the photo wall visible through the dining room doorway. Look at that wall. Really look at it. Do you see me there? Do you see any evidence that you have 2 daughters, not just one? My college graduation isn't there. My awards aren't there. The gallery showing featuring my work last year, not there. It's like I stop existing beyond childhood except as a supporting character in Amber's story. The silence around the table was complete now. Emma looked confused, while Thomas stared intensely at his plate. Amber's face had flushed red, her eyes wide with what appeared to be genuine shock. I have never, I continued, my voice starting to tremble slightly, in my entire adult life, heard you express pride in my accomplishments, Dad. Not once. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? To constantly strive for approval that never comes. I turned to my mother. And you, Mom? When was the last time you called me just to ask about my day? Not to tell me about Amber's kids or to suggest ways I could be more like her, but just to hear about my life, because you were genuinely interested. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Abigail, we love you. We've always loved you. Loving someone and valuing them are different things, I replied, feeling tears threatening but holding them back. You may love me, but you've never valued who I actually am. You've only ever valued the ways I could be more like Amber. The weight of decades of comparison and dismissal filled the room. No one seemed to know how to respond. Jason squeezed my knee supportively under the table. I've spent my entire life trying to earn the same love and approval you give Amber freely, I said, my voice quieter now but no less intense. And it took me until this exact moment to realize that's never going to happen, is it? Because the problem isn't that I'm not accomplished enough or generous enough or successful enough. The problem is that you've never been able to see value in anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of success. I looked at Amber, whose expression had shifted from shock to something more complex, a mixture of discomfort and dawning realization. And the saddest part, I continued, looking back at my parents. You don't even see what you've done. You think you're being supportive parents, but you've spent nearly 3 decades making one child feel like everything she does is extraordinary, while making the other feel like nothing she does will ever be enough. The table remained silent, everyone frozen by the raw emotion filling the room. Then I delivered the final line that truly rendered everyone speechless. I stopped needing your approval years ago, but I never stopped wanting it. And that's on me. But calling me selfish when you haven't bothered to know the first thing about my actual life? That's on you. And I'm done accepting it. The silence that followed felt endless. I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the muffled sound of a neighbor's car starting outside. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the family system itself had short-circuited, unable to process this disruption to its carefully maintained patterns. Dad was the first to recover, his expression hardening into something between defensiveness and anger. That's completely unfair, Abigail. We've always supported you. Supported me. I repeated, feeling oddly calm now that everything was finally being said. Let me give you some examples of your support, Dad. I turned slightly to include everyone at the table in my gaze. When I was 12, I won first place in a statewide art competition. My painting was displayed at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Do either of you remember that day? My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. I do, I continued. I remember because you scheduled the visit to see my artwork on the same day as Amber's debate team finals. We spent 45 minutes at the museum before rushing across town so we wouldn't miss her event. When we arrived late to the debate, Dad, you told me, this is what matters for her future. The art thing is just a hobby for you. Dad's face flushed. That's not, I didn't mean. When I was accepted to the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the top art schools in the country with a 14% acceptance rate, your first response wasn't congratulations. It was concern about tuition costs and job prospects. When Amber got into Harvard Medical School 2 years earlier, you took out a second mortgage without hesitation and threw her a party. That was different, Mom interjected. Medical school is different because you valued it, I finished for her. Not because it objectively deserved more support. I turned to Amber, whose expression had grown increasingly uncomfortable. I don't blame you for any of this, Amber. You didn't ask to be the golden child. But do you remember my college graduation? She frowned slightly, then slowly shook her head. That's because you weren't there. None of you were. Mom had a cold, and you had an important exam, and Dad stayed home to take care of Mom. I walked across that stage without a single family member in the audience. We sent flowers, Mom said weakly. You sent an arrangement to my apartment after I'd already returned to New York, I corrected her. With a card that said, congratulations on your special day, that could have applied to any occasion. Jason shifted beside me. I've watched Abigail win industry awards, land major clients, and create work that makes a real difference in the world, he said, his voice calm but firm. Her talent and dedication are extraordinary. It's been difficult to reconcile the accomplished woman I know with the invisible daughter I see when we're here. Dad's expression darkened. You don't understand our family dynamic. He understands perfectly, I interrupted. Because the dynamic is painfully obvious to anyone who spends more than an hour with us. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. 2 years ago, I designed a campaign for childhood cancer research that helped raise over $3 million in donations. When I told you about it, Mom, you said, that's nice, dear, and immediately showed me photos of Emma's first steps. I looked directly at my father. Last year, I won the National Design Award for my work with environmental conservation. It's one of the highest honors in my industry. I called to tell you, and you said you couldn't talk because you were on your way to Amber's house to help install a swing set. The room remained painfully silent. I'm not sharing these examples to make you feel guilty, I continued, though part of me wondered if that was entirely true. I'm sharing them because you called me selfish, Dad. You made a judgment about my character based on absolutely no knowledge of my actual life. We've been busy with the grandchildren, Mom offered lamely. You've been busy with Amber's children, I corrected her. You've been busy with Amber's life. You've been busy creating family photo displays that erase my adult existence, planning celebration dinners for Amber's accomplishments while barely acknowledging mine, and maintaining a family narrative where one daughter matters and the other is an afterthought. I gestured around the table. Look at today. Did either of you ask a single question about my life in New York? About my relationship with Jason? About the major campaign I just completed? No. But we've spent the entire meal discussing Amber's promotion, Amber's renovation plans, Amber's children's accomplishments, and now Amber's volunteer work. To my surprise, Amber spoke up. "She's right," she said quietly, looking at our parents. I never realized how unbalanced things were until hearing it all laid out like this. I always thought Abigail didn't share much about her life, but maybe she stopped because no one was really listening. Dad's expression shifted from defensive to bewildered. "We're listening now," he said, as though making a generous concession. "Are you?" I asked. "Or are you just waiting for this uncomfortable moment to pass so we can go back to the familiar dynamic where Amber shines and I fade into the background?" "That's not fair, Abigail," Mom protested, tears welling in her eyes. "We've always loved both our daughters." "Love isn't the issue," I replied, feeling suddenly exhausted. "It's never been about whether you love me. It's about whether you see me. Whether you value who I actually am rather than who you wish I would be." Uncle Robert, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should take a break and—" "No," I said firmly. "We've taken enough breaks. We've had enough polite silences and changes of subject. For once, we're going to actually talk about this." I turned back to my parents. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to grow up believing you're fundamentally less valuable than your sibling? To work your entire life for approval that never comes? To achieve success by any objective measure and still feel like a failure because the people who are supposed to be your biggest supporters can barely muster enthusiasm for your accomplishments?" Mom was openly crying now. Dad stared at his plate, his jaw working silently. "I don't need you to answer," I continued, my voice softening slightly. "I just need you to hear me. Really hear me, maybe for the first time." I looked around the table at the shocked faces of my family. I've built a successful career doing work that matters to me. I've created campaigns that have raised millions for causes I believe in. I mentor young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. I volunteer my design services to nonprofits that can't afford professional marketing. I have a relationship with a wonderful man who supports my dreams and values who I am. I reached for Jason's hand, drawing strength from his presence. None of that makes me better or worse than Amber. We've made different choices, but both of our paths have value. The difference is that only one of us has had to fight for validation every step of the way. Amber looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something like respect mixed with sadness. "I never knew you felt this way," she said quietly. "I'm sorry if I've contributed to this dynamic." "You didn't create it," I assured her. "But you've benefited from it, and you've never questioned it either." I turned back to my parents, who sat in stunned silence. I don't expect this one conversation to change decades of patterns. But I do expect to be treated with the same respect and interest that you show Amber. I expect my accomplishments to be acknowledged, my choices to be respected, and my partner to be welcomed. And most of all, I expect never to be called selfish again by people who haven't bothered to know the first thing about how I actually live my life. The silence that followed felt different than before, heavier with realization, lighter with truth finally spoken. No one seemed to know what to say next. "I think," I said finally, standing from my chair, "that Jason and I are going to head back to the city tonight instead of staying over." "Abigail, please," Mom began, reaching toward me. "I'm not leaving because I'm angry," I explained, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "I'm leaving because I need space to process this, and I think you all do too. We can talk again when everyone has had time to reflect." Jason stood beside me, his quiet presence a source of strength. "For what it's worth," I added, looking at my parents, "I didn't say any of this to hurt you. I said it because I'm tired of being hurt myself. And because relationships can't heal without honesty." With those words, I walked away from the Thanksgiving table, leaving a silence more powerful than any I'd experienced before, a silence filled with truth that could no longer be ignored. The drive back to New York passed in a blur of headlights and quiet conversation. Jason drove while I stared out the passenger window, watching the highway lights streak by like shooting stars. My phone buzzed several times but remained face down in my lap. Whatever my family had to say could wait until I was ready to hear it. "You okay?" Jason asked as we crossed the state line into Connecticut. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I feel empty. Like I've been carrying this weight for so long that I don't know how to stand without it. You were incredible back there, he said, reaching for my hand. Everything you said needed to be said. Maybe, I replied. But I never imagined saying it like that. In front of everyone. Sometimes that's the only way to break through patterns that deep. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of tires on asphalt a soothing backdrop to my tumultuous thoughts. What if I burned the bridge completely? I finally asked, giving voice to my deepest fear. What if they never forgive me for embarrassing them? Jason considered this before answering. Then they would be proving everything you said about them was true. His words settled into me, a truth I hadn't fully acknowledged. If my family rejected me for finally speaking my truth, it would only confirm that their love had always been conditional on my silence and compliance. We arrived at our Brooklyn apartment just after midnight. The familiar space, walls covered with art we'd collected together, bookshelves packed with design references and Jason's music theory texts, the upright piano in the corner where he composed, felt like a sanctuary after the emotional battlefield I'd left behind. I collapsed onto our sofa, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation finally dissipating and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Jason made tea, placing a steaming mug on the coffee table before sitting beside me. I should check my phone, I said, though everything in me resisted the idea. Only if you're ready, he replied. I took a deep breath and turned over my phone. 6 missed calls, 3 from Mom, 2 from Amber, 1 from Dad. 7 text messages and 2 voicemails. I started with the texts. From Mom, please call us when you get home safely. We're worried about you. From Amber, I had no idea you felt that way. Can we talk when you're ready? From Dad, your mother is very upset. Call us. From Mom again, we love you, Abigail. Please don't shut us out. The remaining messages expressed similar sentiments, concern, confusion, requests to talk. None acknowledged the substance of what I'd said at dinner. I set the phone down without listening to the voicemails. They're worried about me, I said to Jason. But they're not hearing me. Give them time, he suggested. What you said tonight challenged their entire understanding of your family dynamic. That's not easy to process. I nodded, knowing he was right, but feeling disappointed nonetheless. Part of me had hoped for an immediate revelation, an acknowledgement of the hurt they'd caused, even an apology. The reality. Concern without understanding felt painfully familiar. I'll text Mom to let her know we got home safely, I decided. But I need some space before having another conversation. I sent a brief message. We arrived home safely. I need some time to process everything. I'll call when I'm ready to talk. Mom's response came immediately. We love you, sweetie. Take all the time you need. The words felt hollow, a platitude that avoided the deeper issues. I set my phone aside and leaned against Jason's shoulder, allowing tears to come for the first time since leaving my parents' house. What happens now? I asked, my voice small against the vastness of what had unfolded. Now you breathe, he said, wrapping an arm around me. You gave voice to decades of hurt tonight. That's enormous. The rest can wait until you're ready. The following days passed in a strange limbo. I returned to work, focusing on the familiar routines of client meetings and design reviews. My colleagues noticed my subdued mood but attributed it to post-holiday fatigue. Only my assistant Maria, who had become something of a confidant, received the full story during a late-night design session. Families have a way of locking us into old roles, she observed, adjusting the color balance on a project we were finalizing. Breaking that pattern takes incredible courage. Or incredible stupidity, I replied with a weak smile. Courage, she insisted. Most people spend their whole lives swallowing those truths. For days after Thanksgiving, my phone lit up with Amber's name. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Hey, she said, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. Is this a good time? As good as any, I replied, stepping away from my desk and moving toward the building's rooftop garden for privacy. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, she began. About how different our experiences in the family have been. I remained silent, waiting. I never saw it, she continued. I never noticed how much attention I received compared to you, how differently they responded to our accomplishments. It was just normal to me. It was normal to me too, I admitted. That's the sad part. I accepted it as the natural order of things for so long. I talked to Thomas about it, she said. He pointed out that he's noticed it at every family gathering, but didn't feel it was his place to say anything. This surprised me. He noticed. Apparently it's obvious to everyone except us, she said with a mirthless laugh. I guess when you grow up in a dynamic, you don't question it. A silence stretched between us, filled with 3 decades of disparate experiences. I'm sorry, she finally said. I know I didn't create the situation, but I benefited from it. And I never stood up for you or questioned why they treated us so differently. Her acknowledgement loosened something in my chest. Thank you for saying that. Mom and Dad are struggling, she added. I don't think they know how to process what you said. Dad keeps insisting they've always treated us equally, and Mom cries whenever your name comes up. They've spent decades convinced they're perfect parents, I replied. It's not easy to have that narrative challenged. Will you talk to them? She asked. Not right away if you're not ready, but eventually. I considered this, watching clouds drift across the November sky. Yes, I decided. But on my terms, when I'm ready. And I won't go back to pretending everything is fine when it isn't. That's fair, she agreed. For what it's worth, I think what you did was brave. Painful for everyone, but necessary. After ending the call, I sat alone on the rooftop bench, watching the Brooklyn traffic flow beneath me. Amber's acknowledgement felt like the first step on a long, uncertain path toward healing. Not a resolution, but an opening. That evening, I called Dr. Bennett, the therapist I'd seen on and off since moving to New York. She agreed to see me the following day. What you described was a significant boundary-setting moment, she observed after I recounted the Thanksgiving confrontation. You've talked about these family dynamics for years, but this was the first time you directly challenged them. I feel guilty for upsetting everyone, I admitted. Especially during a holiday. That's natural, she replied. But consider this, the upset isn't because you spoke up, it's because the underlying dynamic has been harmful. You just brought it to the surface. She helped me process the complex emotions swirling through me. Relief at finally speaking my truth, fear of rejection, guilt over disrupting family harmony, and a growing sense of self-worth independent of my parents' validation. The hardest part of changing family dynamics, she observed near the end of our session, is accepting that you can only control your part. Your parents may or may not be capable of the reflection necessary to truly hear you. And if they're not? I asked. Then you determine what kind of relationship is possible while maintaining your own boundaries and well-being, she replied. Sometimes the greatest gift we give ourselves is acceptance of what cannot change, while changing how we respond to it. A week after Thanksgiving, I received a text from my father asking if we could meet. After consulting with Dr. Bennett, I suggested a coffee shop in New York, neutral territory where I'd feel more grounded. Next weekend. I proposed. Saturday afternoon. We'll be there, he replied. The intervening days were filled with anxiety and preparation. Jason helped me rehearse what I wanted to say, while Dr. Bennett provided strategies for maintaining boundaries if the conversation became defensive. Remember, she advised, you don't need to justify your feelings or experiences. They're valid regardless of whether your parents acknowledge them. By the time Saturday arrived, I felt as prepared as I could be for whatever might unfold, whether reconciliation or further disconnection. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time in my life, I was walking it on my own terms, speaking my truth without apology. The coffee shop I'd chosen was a small, quiet place in Park Slope, far enough from my apartment to feel neutral, but still within my comfort zone. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered some privacy without feeling isolated. Jason had offered to join me, but this felt like a conversation I needed to have alone. When my parents entered, I was struck by how much older they suddenly seemed. Dad's shoulders were slightly hunched, Mom's expression anxious as they scanned the room. I raised my hand in a small wave, watching as relief washed over their faces upon seeing me. Abigail, Mom said, moving toward me with arms outstretched before stopping herself, uncertain if the gesture would be welcome. Hi, I replied, standing to greet them but maintaining a slight physical distance. Thank you for coming. We settled around the table with our coffees, an awkward silence stretching between us. It was Dad who finally broke it. "We've been doing a lot of thinking since Thanksgiving," he began, his voice uncharacteristically tentative. "About what you said. About how we've treated you compared to your sister." I nodded but remained silent, remembering Dr. Bennett's advice to let them do the initial talking. "I want to say first that we never intended to make you feel less valued," he continued. "We've always loved you, always been proud of you. But," Mom added softly, "we've realized that we may not have shown that in ways that you could recognize." I took a sip of my coffee, giving myself a moment to process their words. "Intent and impact are different things," I finally said. "I believe you didn't intend to hurt me. But the impact of your actions, or lack of actions, was real hurt." Dad nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said about your art competition. About your college graduation. About your awards." He paused, visibly struggling. "I didn't remember those things the way you described them, but Amber confirmed your version of events." "You needed Amber to confirm my experiences were real?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "No," Mom interjected quickly. "We believe you. It's just that we didn't see it. We didn't realize how our behavior looked through your eyes." "It's not just how it looked," I corrected her gently. "It's how it was. How it is." "Yes," she acknowledged, her eyes filling with tears. "You're right." Dad cleared his throat. "I said things at Thanksgiving about you being selfish that were unfair and untrue. I spoke from ignorance about your life, and I'm sorry." The apology, though simple, was unprecedented. In all my years, I couldn't remember my father ever apologizing to me for anything substantive. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling insufficient for the moment. "We'd like to understand better," Mom said, reaching tentatively across the table though not quite touching my hand. "About your work, your volunteering, your life in New York. If you're willing to share." I studied their faces, looking for signs of the dismissiveness I'd grown accustomed to. Instead, I saw something new, an uncertainty, a humility that suggested they were genuinely trying to see me differently. "I'd like that," I replied cautiously. "But I need you to understand something first. This isn't about my accomplishments being good enough to finally deserve your attention. It's about being valued for who I am, not just what I achieve." They both nodded, though I sensed my father struggling more with this concept than my mother. "And I need you to understand that this won't be fixed in one conversation," I continued. "Changing patterns that have existed for decades takes time and consistent effort. There will be setbacks. Old habits will resurface. What matters is whether we address them when they do." "We're committed to trying," Mom said, Dad nodding in agreement beside her. We talked for nearly 3 hours, longer than any real conversation we'd had in years. I shared details about my career that I'd previously kept to myself, knowing they'd likely be dismissed. I described my mentorship program for young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, the pro bono work I did for environmental nonprofits, the community art initiative I'd helped establish in my Brooklyn neighborhood. They listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking questions that suggested they were truly trying to understand my world. Dad seemed particularly struck by the business aspects of my career, the client acquisition, the team management, the strategic thinking required. "I never realized how much business acumen your work requires," he admitted. "I always thought of art as just creating pretty pictures." "That's part of why recognition in my field means so much," I explained. "Because so many people dismiss creative work as frivolous or easy. The National Design Award I won last year? It's the industry equivalent of winning a major medical research grant." I could see this comparison land for him in a way my previous attempts to explain my achievements never had. As our conversation drew to a close, we tentatively discussed the upcoming Christmas holiday. Rather than automatically assuming I would come to their house as usual, they asked what would make me comfortable. "I think neutral ground might be best for now," I suggested. "Perhaps we could all meet in the city? I could show you my office, maybe have dinner afterward." "We'd like that," Mom said, looking genuinely pleased at the prospect. "And Jason would be included, of course," I added, watching carefully for their reaction. "Of course," Dad agreed without hesitation. We owe him an apology as well for how we've overlooked him all these years. As we prepared to part ways, Mom asked hesitantly, "Will you be speaking with Amber soon?" "She's been very reflective since your conversation." "We've been texting," I confirmed. "I think we're both trying to figure out our relationship without the comparative dynamic that's always defined it." "That's good," she said. "She cares about you very much." We said goodbye with awkward hugs that felt both foreign and familiar. As I watched them walk away, I felt neither the triumph of victory nor the complete resolution of decades of hurt. Instead, I felt something more nuanced, the tentative beginning of a new type of relationship, one built on more honest foundations. 2 weeks later, I met Amber for lunch near her hospital during a trip she made into the city for a medical conference. Without our parents' presence, we found ourselves navigating unfamiliar conversational territory. "I never realized how different our experiences in the family were," she admitted over salads at a quiet restaurant. "I just assumed you were more independent, that you preferred doing your own thing." Part of me did develop that independence as a survival mechanism, I acknowledged. But a lot of it came from realizing early on that no matter what I did, it would never receive the same recognition as your achievements. She nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about how I benefited from that dynamic without ever questioning it. How easy it is to accept advantages when they're presented as natural or deserved." "It wasn't your responsibility to fix it," I assured her. "You were a child too, operating within the system they created." "Still," she replied, "I could have been more aware as an adult. More supportive of you." We spent the meal trading stories from our respective fields, finding unexpected parallels between medical practice and creative direction. The high-pressure deadlines, the need to balance technical expertise with interpersonal skills, the satisfaction of solving complex problems. "We're not so different in how we approach our work," she observed. "Just different content areas." "Maybe that's something Mom and Dad never saw," I suggested. "The similarities beneath the surface differences." By the time Christmas arrived, a new dynamic had begun to emerge in our family interactions. When we all gathered at my office for a tour followed by dinner at a nearby restaurant, I noticed subtle but significant changes. Mom asked detailed questions about my current projects, showing genuine interest in the creative process. Dad engaged with Jason about his film composition work, finding common ground in their shared appreciation for structure and technical precision. Amber and Thomas brought their children, who were fascinated by the design studio's creative environment. The dinner conversation flowed more evenly than any family gathering I could remember. When Amber shared news about her hospital's new pediatric wing, my parents listened with interest, but then naturally shifted to include updates from Jason and me as well. There were still moments of regression, Dad automatically turning to Amber first for opinions, Mom making an unconscious comparison between our life choices. But unlike before, these moments were acknowledged, sometimes with humor, sometimes with gentle correction. "Old habits," Dad would say with a self-deprecating smile when caught in a familiar pattern. The process wasn't perfect or complete. There were difficult conversations, moments of frustration on all sides, times when it seemed easier to retreat to old patterns than continue the challenging work of creating new ones. But beneath the occasional setbacks was a foundation of honesty that hadn't existed before. As the months passed, my relationship with my family continued to evolve. My parents made visible efforts to engage with my world, attending a gallery showing featuring my work, asking questions about my career developments, acknowledging my accomplishments with the same enthusiasm they showed for Amber's. My relationship with Amber transformed perhaps most significantly of all. Without the comparative framework that had always defined our interactions, we discovered a genuine friendship based on mutual respect rather than competition. We began a tradition of monthly sister dinners, alternating between the city and her suburb, creating space for a relationship independent of our parents' influence. The most profound change, however, was within myself. The validation I'd sought externally for so long began to feel less crucial as I strengthened my own sense of self-worth. Dr. Bennett helped me recognize that while family recognition mattered, my value wasn't dependent on it. The girl who needed her parents' approval to feel worthy has grown into a woman who knows her worth, she observed during one of our sessions a year after the Thanksgiving confrontation. That's the real victory here. Jason noticed the change too. You carry yourself differently now, he told me one evening as we walked home from dinner with friends. Like you're standing fully in who you are. The journey wasn't linear or complete. There were still family gatherings where I felt old insecurities surfacing, still moments when a careless comment from my father could sting with familiar sharpness. But these instances no longer defined me or my relationships. They were moments to address and move through rather than wounds to carry silently. Perhaps the most important lesson I learned through this process was that speaking truth, however difficult, creates possibilities that silence never can. By giving voice to decades of hurt at that Thanksgiving table, I opened a door that had remained firmly closed throughout my adult life, a door to more authentic relationships, to being truly seen, to breaking cycles that might otherwise have continued for generations. The courage to speak up didn't come from a place of anger, though anger certainly played its part. It came from a deeper place of self-respect, a recognition that I deserved to be valued for who I truly was, not for who others wished me to be. That recognition continues to guide me in all my relationships, personal and professional. It reminds me to speak up when necessary, to set boundaries with love rather than resentment, to value myself even when others fail to do so. If you've ever felt invisible within your own family, if you've struggled under the weight of comparison or conditional approval, know that your experience is valid. Your feelings matter. Your voice deserves to be heard. Speaking your truth may not instantly transform relationships shaped by decades of patterns, but it creates space for new possibilities that silence never could. Have you ever had to confront family patterns that hurt you? How did you find the courage to speak up? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, the journey to being truly seen begins with the courage to speak your truth, even when, especially when, it makes the whole table go silent. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it brings you strength for your own journey toward authentic relationships and self-worth.